I think that was it. So thanks for bearing with me on Twitch, and yeah, this is, well, I'll let you introduce yourself. Our second talk.
My name's up there, so that makes it easier. Hello, I'm Darren Gray. I'm going to talk today about involving the player a little bit more in procedural generation. Gillian had mentioned talk there about kind of more inventive ways to use procedural generation. Personally, I want to do the same, but I'm looking at it here in a more focused on mechanics of games. I am a roguelike designer. I present Roguelike Radio, which is a design-focused podcast. This is Rogue, which Gillian also had a screenshot of. Roguelikes, for many years, have had procedural generation at their heart. It's been used to design environments and design interesting challenges for players. Over the years, roguelikes have evolved. We've got more graphics, more fidelity, more interesting mechanics, and also more generators, BSP trees, cellular automata, Veroni maps, all sorts of other kind of different techniques. But we still have this setup in games that the computer makes an environment and the player plays in that environment. And that, once the map is generated, that's the end of the procedural generation. The player doesn't notice anything further. And as we see procedural generation taken up by new games, this is the beautifully bleak English countryside generated in Surrey being hunted. We're seeing the same thing in a lot of the games coming out right now. The gameplay is not affected by the procedural generation other than it being a starting condition, other than it being a replacement for a level designer. The procedural generation is providing wonderful replayability, but it's not affecting the gameplay. So I'm a roguelike game designer. Gameplay is all I care about. All my games are ASCII, well, mostly. I really want to see what we can do with mechanics. The thing that really got me interested in this a few years ago was a game called ADOM. The very exciting thing on this rather bland looking screenshot is the little green dashes. For those that aren't familiar with roguelike symbols, the white dots are not just empty space, the blocky grey bits are walls, the letters are enemies, and the little green bits, which are showing up as quotation marks, they're herbs. Very exciting herbs. These are magical herbs in the world of ADOM. And the herbs do not stay the same on the level. They grow and change and move around based on a procedure called Conway's Game of Life. This is a really simple system. If a cell has a certain number of neighbours, it will either live or die. And it's a very simple system, with really simple rules, but it can produce these interesting patterns. And the great thing in ADOM is you have to play with it. I'll just show you a little example of Conway in action here. Here's a few cells. Now, if any living cell has more than 3 neighbours or less than 2 neighbours, it will die. If any dead cell has exactly 2 or 3 neighbours, it will spawn a new cell. And that's it. That's the simple code. It comes down to 6 or 7 lines of code. And what you get actually is really big patterns like this. Really amazing patterns emerge from just a few blocks here and there, and you can produce infinitely looping complex scenarios from this. And I think this is wonderful. I think it's great to play around with in the game of ADOM. I spent hours fiddling about with Conway's Game of Life, checking out different ways to manipulate the game environment so that I could produce useful things for the gameplay. It is very simple, the rules for this. Why we have this complexity is that what you're seeing here is some dots on a 2D plane with some simple rules about looking at their neighbours. But you have the added dimension of time here, that this changes over time. So this is actually a 3-dimensional system, but we can understand this very easily as humans. We interpret sort of long-term temporal patterns very easily. So if you take some simple rules, add some sort of temporal dimension to that, we as players can interpret that quite easily and learn to manipulate it, learn to game it, which is what I'm really interested in. So I'm looking at ways in which we can make games more dynamic. And easy thing to do is try and look at more dynamic environments. We have these environments in games where the generator creates you a cave system or whatever else, and you go and explore that and you find monsters in it, but you don't really see the environment. It's like background noise in a way. what if we have something a bit more like this, something more exciting, something more dynamic that you have to react to? Dwarf Fortress, again another pretty game this, it has lava in the game, and lava can be used to wonderful and terrifying effect. The lava will spread in the game using some simple cellular automata rules, and the player can quite easily understand the flow of lava. And it takes some time for the lava to flow, and you can tap open veins of lava, and you can block up veins of lava, and you can manipulate it in interesting gameplay ways, often leading to terrible tragedy. And this is great fun. Getting to play with lava in the game, it adds this great feeling of dynamism to the game. This is a game called Brogue. In Brogue, you play the little axe symbol in the corner there. Brogue has a number of different dynamic systems as you play. It's a roguelike that was written about 80 years ago now, but it's still being developed, and it has some of the best design work of any roguelike, and it's got a lot of interesting systems. The purple squares that you can see there, they represent a cloud of purple gas. And the gases in the game are really quite interesting because they always explode from a source. So you start off with one pinpoint square, and then over the turns that will spread. You as the player can react to this and move based on the positions of these, and you can use this to good gameplay effect. If a monster is nearby, you can block off their escape route while staying outside the gas. You can let the it's caustic flesh-eating gas, I should point out. So it's not something you want to be in, but you can manipulate it so that the enemies are trapped in it. You can set fire to it, which will then spread flames, again using procedural rules, simple cellular automata rules, to spread this around. So instead of just having square rooms and narrow corridors, you've got a whole environment to interact with. The static environment becomes more interesting from a gameplay point of view because you have these dynamic elements in it, and the dynamic elements themselves become very fun to play with. They make the whole experience much more interesting. Left 4 Dead is well known for its AI director system, where as you're playing, the director, I love the fact that it gives it personality to it, gives a name to it, but essentially the game decides to throw in a bunch of monsters to attack you based on your current situation, your resources, your positioning, etc., etc. This is a great way of mixing up the gameplay, never letting the player feel entirely safe, and giving a fun challenge, and it does it in a nice dramatic way, which I think is a great way of doing this. AI is an important issue which I will come back to a little bit later. But this is all about how to add dynamic elements to the game. We're used to having the dynamic elements just from AI, things moving around, but often our interactions with those are simple. There are ways of making much more interesting environments out there. Another thing we can do is have player-instigated generation. Now you may think giving the procedural paintbrush to the player is going to lead to a little bit of mess, and it may well do, but they might have fun doing it. And what this is about is letting the player manipulate things. We're used to things like Terraria and Minecraft letting you change the environment. In some cases that has gameplay effects. More often than not, it's more for creativity purposes. What I'm really interested in is getting the player involved in shaping the environment and having really core mechanics centered around that. Now, when I'm interested in game mechanics, one of the things I often do is look at board games, where there's a lot of innovation, a lot of inventive ideas, and a lot of really good ideas that players can understand very easily, because in board game design, you need to have the player able to understand the rules. They're the ones operating the rules. So a good scenario in this is to look at board games, and here's a game called Hive. Now Hive starts off with a randomly distributed set of fish. No, not Hive, I'm sorry, that's coming next. This is Hey, That's My Fish. A game about penguins trying to get fish. It's a really great tactical game. You start off with a random distribution of fish, and you set your pieces on the board in certain places that you think might be of strategic interest. Each tile has either 1, 2, or 3 fish. The 3 fish tiles are really valuable. You want to go around the map during your turns and get these fish. Now it starts off, it's a random set of fish. Not that interesting, lots of games with random starting conditions. But during the course of play, the board changes. As you move pieces around, you pull off bits of the map with you. They become your points for the game. And you're not able to move over empty spaces, and you're not able to move past other penguins. So it changes the environment quite into interesting ways. You end up with these corridors and these open spaces, and people trying to block spaces and lock spaces to themselves and cut off other people. Now, any procedural designer will recognize this system of having a random set of starting positions and then going over it multiple times in multiple passes to shape it up into a more procedural system. You know, we use Perlin noise and then run Veroni map data over it. We do this all the time, and this turns it into gameplay. It makes the player go through the steps of turning this random thing into an interesting thing, and lets the player have fun in doing that. I think that's incredibly compelling. This is Hive, which similarly, you shape the board as you play. You can only move pieces or place pieces in the game. There are specific rules to placement and to movement. The board is consisted entirely of your pieces that you control. And this leads to very interesting systems as they go about. Every game you end up with a very different shaped board. The goal of the game is not to score points, it's not to kill other player pieces, you can't kill other player pieces. It's to surround the enemy queen entirely. So the entire game is geometry. It's a sort of procedural geometry that's controlled by the players, instigated by the players. I think this is a very fascinating space to explore. Carcassonne lets you build up cities and roads and rivers and other features over the course of the game. And this is the players working together, but not quite working together because they're trying to block each other and steal each other's cities and so on. But creating these big, fast-scrolling city maps and other interesting things. And we have tools that make beautiful-looking cities out of procedural algorithms. But this is making it gameplay. This is making the act of creation part of the player experience. And every game you end up with these different maps that look very, I think they look very nice anyway. And this is more than just something that's created by a computer, because this actually has gameplay meaning to every section to it. It has a gameplay history to every section to it. Every road uncompleted, every city stolen away. These mean something to the players involved. And this is, I would classify as procedural generation, because it's the player having to follow the specific rules of the game and generating the content based on that. So that's sort of player-instigated generation. We talked before about having more dynamic environments. What about if we combine these two? If we have environments that are changing and interacting, then the player is able to influence that and turning it all into one big, messy game. And this is where we get into interactive generation, which I've chosen to display with a robot arm wrestling an old man. This is a view of our future. Robots will take us all. So here's a game I made a few years ago, the second game I ever made actually. And this is going to look confusing, but the green hashes are walls, and they're being created over time by slightly lighter green hashes that are running around creating walls. Every time you play this, they create things in a different pattern. Every level, in fact, they follow a different pattern of generation. You are the blue at symbol. You're moving around trying to kill the different letters. They get blocked by these walls. You move around these walls. The object of this game, you actually play an invincible robot who fires unstoppable bullets. No enemies can hurt you, and the bullets will destroy everything in their path, including the walls, including the robots that are making the walls, and including the robots that you're trying to eliminate. The bullets loop around the map. So the problem becomes if one of your unstoppable bullets hit into your invincible armor, then the universe will implode. So what's interesting about this is that you have these robots going around and making these levels up as you play. The levels get created over time, modified over time. As you destroy bits, they get replaced in different patterns, and every level has a different geometric pattern that they're following. But also, your bullets end up becoming a new terrain type, a mobile terrain type that's moving around, and you need to fire these bullets if you want to kill enemies, but fire too many and you're going to get yourself trapped. So this generates a lot of interesting scenarios. This is an example of a very rough, barely playable game, but it's interesting to play with this sort of thing. here's an upcoming game that I'm very excited about. It's coming next year. It's called Mushroom 11. In this, procedural generation is the control scheme for the game. You control like a block of cells, which follow a sort of cellular automatic. Your control scheme is to erase cells. As you erase cells, they get replaced. You always have the same number of cells. So your splodge of cells is constantly expanding based on where you kind of erase on the other side. And you have to use this to navigate environments, to physically alter things, and it becomes a very fascinating, interesting thing to play with. And quite frankly, I haven't seen anything else like this, where procedural generation is the control scheme of the game. I think this is a fantastic idea. Maybe others have other examples, but this is the only one I've seen. And it creates a lot of interesting scenarios, a lot of interesting puzzles and interactivity. Wonderful thing as well is the cellular automata is really quite intuitive for people. It feels like a kind of living thing. And in this, you're shaped as this strange alien body. So this system just feels natural. Even though it's completely alien, completely weird, it feels natural to us. It's very intuitive to play and very, very fun as well. We don't just have to do those sorts of mechanics-based plays. Versu by Linden Labs uses interactive generation for creating dialogue, creating stories. You take control of a character at a dinner party or at another event, and you interact with the other people in there. They're represented sort of NPC characters, but everything in it is generated. This is not dialogue trees, this is not preset content, this is all interesting generative content. But you're influencing this content, you're interacting with things, you're choosing your interactions, whether to get horribly drunk in front of the grandmama, or whether to do other things that may offend or please people. And this creates interesting stories. So we can use this for storytelling as well. This is a game. So I need a little bit of audio for this. I don't think the audio is working. So, this is a game I made last year. It's called Mosaic, and it has generative music based on the environment, but you modify the environment. So it's generative music based on how you play. Mike's going to come and fiddle with things, and then you're going to hear some horrible procedural music. Or maybe not. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, the music generator sweeps across the map, and it will play. Turn it down just a little bit. It will play notes based on which areas are filled in with colour. As you move around, you colour things in or out. If you manage to colour in an outline of a block, it will fill in that whole area, and that suddenly becomes notes. You end up. Each row is actually a different instrument. And as you go through, the map starts off silent, you fill in certain areas, you get certain notes coming in. Enemies will come in and they add their own discordant music. The music ends up representing the gameplay. As you get closer to completion, more cells are coloured up, more dramatic and intense music is playing. As the enemies come on board, you get more of their discordant notes. And now this is combining procedural music, done in a very simplistic ways. I made the music part of this in 4 hours after being sleep deprived at the end of Game Jam. I'll be doing the same this year. But it's combining it with the gameplay. And that's what I find interesting, that it's not just the music generator on its own, it's informed by the gameplay, it's affected by the player. Now, there is a danger to this sort of thing. I'll turn the music off. The danger is that when the player is controlling things and influencing things and has a lot of freedom with the generator, they can do things vastly different from you as a designer intended. Now, we're rather used to this in game design in general. I have found it's even worse with systems whereby the player has a huge amount of agency. For this example, I released this game last year. I got a lot of feedback early on that it sounded fantastic. A lot of people were saying this sounds amazing. One guy said that it was like the game was making a soundtrack up to go along with his gameplay as he went along. He found it really good. And then I got some other feedback saying this is atrocious. How on earth can anyone play this and have the audio on? It's absolutely terrible. I couldn't understand. And then I saw some videos of people playing it and realised they were playing it differently from how I played it. So they were getting completely different arrays of notes and completely different ways that the sounds were being combined. I specifically designed it so that the areas of the level that are of tactical interest to fill in first produce the notes that play together better. As part of the kind of procedural generation, that was the goal. But people weren't doing that. They were playing about and being weird, not understanding things, and weren't using the optical tactics, so they weren't getting the nicest audio experience. Now, you could say perhaps that's part of the game, that if you got bad music, that means you're a crap player. You should learn better. But maybe that's not such a good attitude to have towards your player base. Another example is a game that I released earlier this year. It's called Data Queen. It's based a little on Hive. You move around this map. The green grids are connected. Green hexes are sort of what are called connected grids. And the blue grids are disconnected grids. They're kind of enemy territory, whereas the green areas are your territory. As you move around, you create green territory. As the enemies move around, they destroy the green territory. So it becomes a kind of a territory control game. You have completely free movement on the green grids. As you move around, you can get into better position for combat, and you have direction-based abilities. Which direction you attack from affects which ability is triggered. So this all combines very well, and some people gave some really good feedback about how these elements all integrated in a really interesting way. I was really happy with that. And until I saw the next video, where someone did a let's play of this, and they seemed to be understanding the system well. They were going around, they were combining abilities in interesting ways, they were wiping out the enemies quite well. And then they started doing this, which is just filling in columns. And they figured out that enemies can't spawn on green space, so if they're really boring, they can just fill in the whole map. Starting from one end, going down row by row by row by row, and so the optimal gameplay became the most boring, horrible gameplay. So these sorts of things can be issues. As designers, we are used to having to deal with these sorts of quality assurance things and kind of testing, more testing. But it's something to be aware of. I think it's a bit more of a pitfall when you're dealing with this kind of generative content. Now, I mentioned AI earlier. Don't forget the AI, or it'll come, because it can be used in much more interesting ways than we have at the moment. Game design at the moment tends to have a static environment and active AIs, or NPCs, that are moving around. You interact with the NPCs, you don't interact with the environment. The NPCs behave in certain ways, the environment doesn't do anything interesting. Some games like Left 4 Dead do a little bit more overall control of the NPCs, but most games have each NPC just have its own simple AI states. It doesn't really pay too much attention to its surroundings, or if it does, it's only to a few little things in the surroundings. It's not really considering the game as a whole. I think there's a lot more work to be done on breaking that idea of separate AI and environment. With procedural generation, we should be considering combining the two into one entity. It's all about the game experience. So why not have a living dungeon? Why not have enemies that phase in and out of being parts of the environment? We can have dungeons that are made of flesh, the walls that breathe, and corridors that pulse with life. We can have trees that are afraid of fire, so if you go near them with a torch, they scream for help and run away. We can do a lot more. We're being really close-minded in a lot of our games, that a wall is a solid thing and a floor is a solid thing, and we will go about our games in really boring ways. With fantasy games, with sci-fi games, with all the wonderful collection of alien worlds we create, we can play around with this a lot. We can, there is no restriction on game content. Unlike a lot of other art forms where, there are very set structures that you must follow, with games the space is very open, and yet we see often just following the same tried and true formulas. So I think there's a lot more we can do. A lot more we can do with dynamic environments, with letting the player play about with things, with giving more interactive experiences for the players. And we can combine AI, we can combine procedural generation, and combine novel control schemes and all the wonderful things that Gillian was talking about as well. That's it. Any questions?
Okay, thanks a lot, speaker. Yeah, those are some really great examples. That was a great talk, and Mosaic in particular is a favourite of mine. I linked it in the Twitch Twitch chat and on Twitter, and hopefully when I get the Wi-Fi sorted, people here will be able to play it as well. Right, does anyone have any questions for Darren on the floor here?
Do you have any other recommendations for interesting procedural games that weren't mentioned in the talk?
Yeah, probably loads. Yeah, is any particular aspects?
I'm very into roguelikes.
Okay. There's actually, unfortunately, I think not that many interesting roguelikes apart from, in terms of what I'm really interested in, which is making things that change a lot and kind of have dynamic environments and things. Most roguelikes do this very simple system: create a dungeon, randomly throw some monsters and treasure in it, let the player play about, and hope that there's kind of interesting stuff coming out of that. So, yeah, actually no, I don't have many good examples I can bring up. You're going to see Ultima Ratio Regum later from Mark Johnson here, and that has a lot of very interesting procedural systems involved. I'm still pestering Mark to actually add some gameplay.
In time.
But yeah, I think it's a bit of an unexplored space. And I think Brogue is one of the best examples for all aspects of roguelike design. But I would definitely like to see more.
Okay, there are a load of questions by Twitch. We'll take one more from here. Yeah.
Just on Andrews, what do you use to develop your ASCII games in?
I currently use a Lua-based roguelike engine called the T-Engine. It produces grid-based games and has a whole load of procedural algorithms included in it. Yeah, I used to, when I started off game development, I was using just Turbo Pascal. I started off writing really basic code and reinventing the wheel far too many times. I got sick of that and started to use someone else's engine because I'm not that great a coder. I prefer design to coding.
Seems really powerful. You always get set up incredibly fast now that you're used to it during a jam. You seem to be able to get a lot going out very quickly.
I do a lot of copy pasting. Yeah, jam people, copy paste. It's the way to make things.
So we're going to have a coffee break in a minute, so I'll ask questions on Twitch now because you can always ask Darren in person.
Hello, Twitch.
What is the difference between randomized music selection and procedural music?
Okay.
There you go.
So, Mosaic, as you saw earlier, there's a whole bunch of things. First of all the notes were taken from, what's the term? The pentatonic scale, which is a specific scale of 5 notes, A, C, something, blah, blah. I don't know music. I had to learn music in a crash course during 4 hours at the end of Game Jam. The pentatonic scale is a selection of notes that go really well when played together. And it doesn't matter what you play together with them, they sound quite nice. Now, the sort of music engine that I made, it relied on which bits of the map were filled in. So it's not just completely random because the player is actually going about that. And it shows a different instrument for each line, so that you would end up with interesting variety. If you fill in one line on its own, you would just get the one instrument going. The more lines that you add on, you get more kind of an orchestra playing. There's specific time spacing that obviously needs to be controlled. In Mosaic, it's really simple. It's every 1/5 of a second. It plays a note based on the line. And there's a kind of how should I put it? A wave. There's a wave that Mosaic follows. Between every music step, the generator decides whether the wave is going to go up a note, down a note, or stay the same. And each individual instrument will decide whether it follows that or diverges slightly. So you get rippling patterns, and this was part of the design to have the music have this kind of flowy kind of feel to it. But there's a lot of other complex music generators out there. A lot of them produce interesting stuff. Mine is pretty simple, but produces some interesting things. Pentatonic scale is the main thing, because especially harps with the pentatonic scale, you can play them in whatever random order you want. It sounds amazing. Harps played random. Just chuck a harp down some stairs; it'll just sound blissful.
Okay, one more question, then I'll release you all for coffee. Do you know of any particular interesting examples of games that have like NPCs or enemies in an ecosystem that interact with each other, not just the player? I thought that was quite a good question. I'm sure you have an encyclopedic knowledge of this kind of thing. So if there is an example, I'm sure you have.
I don't know a really good example of that. see someone's got his hand up.
Team's Curse and Depths of Peril.
I don't know those.
They are like Diablo-like, but the dungeon has several different levels, and the creatures can come up and go down and form ecosystems and tribes and
Do
stuff.
they interact with each other, the creatures?
Yeah.
Okay, so Death of Peril and
Team's Curse.
Din's Curse. Oh, I've heard of Din's Curse.
Yeah.
So, to me, I don't know how interesting that is. Having things interacting with each other, especially if they're out of your sight. What does it matter? The game should be player-centered, in my opinion. I'm not interested in what goes on behind the club. Simulate it, make it up. Doesn't matter. As long as the player feels like they're getting an interesting experience. Irrelevant. But that's just me.
Strong opinions, that's what we wanted from today's Right, I will release you all for coffee. Twitch, I'll be round to your house in about 5 minutes. And we'll be back at 2 o'clock with Tanya Short from Kitfox Games and then the rest of the next one. Thanks very much. The coffee's just out here, by the way. And Twitch, I'm going to